Well, Shabbat Shalom. I just want to welcome everyone to the Sabbath Day conference call. This is Barbara serving as your host today, and today Brother Dwayne will be your co-host. Today the title of this is Ancient Sabbath Observance at the Time of Yeshua. And so the consecutive week was held at Bay. And this is in the article Shavuot Sabbath. It's an ancient Sabbath observance, and we find written the following. Most theologians and some scholars assume that mainstream Jewish society at the time of Jesus was practicing a fixed 7-day week, which was the same as the modern fixed 7-day week. And this is extremely doubtful. The change from a lunar to a fixed week was brought about by the power and influence of Rome. As long as the Nazarenes held power in Jerusalem, all Roman practices and customs, including that of the consecutive week, were held at bay. And here is the link for most of this article, and I will leave this link below.
This article goes on to explain that Yeshua observed a Sabbath, but this Sabbath was neither Saturday nor Sunday. The Nazarene Sabbath was a lunar Sabbath. A lunar month starts on the new moon. This was standard practice among the Beni Amen Nazarene order and most of the other Orthodox Jewish sects of the time. Lunar Sabbath observance is an ancient Semitic custom concurrent and antedating the time of Yeshua, and that was from that former reference. The lunar week. Further states the article, it is a mistake to assume the ancient followers of Yahushua kept the modern week consisting of Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. They did not. Their week was a lunar week, which started over each quarter moon. Most scholars agree that the modern concept of the week began in the 1st century and was made popular by Rome, although there is not unanimous agreement on this point. And Nature's Testimony, you can see that in the Psalms. Nazarenes observed the Sabbath according to the lunar quarters. At the time of the Messiah, the observance of the weekly Sabbath was a national law for those in Judah. All 7 sects, include the Nazarenes and the Essenes, observed it, although not always on the same day. The Ben Zadok order appears to have observed the Sabbath on a fixed week, irrespective of the lunar cycle, whereas the Beni Amen, the Nazarenes, observed the Sabbath according to the lunar quarters.
Well, I know a lot of you have heard about these other Sabbaths and these other calendars, Zadok and Essenes and Qumran and all these things. But these documents will show you the lunar Sabbath and the days that were kept for Yeshua. Gentile Christians also kept the same Sabbath calendar as Yeshua did. But what of the Gentile Christians? Did this early split off from the Nazarenes also observe a lunar Sabbath cycle? Early historical records clearly confirm that at a very early date, Gentile Christians also kept the same Sabbath calendar as the Nazarenes. So each week began on either the new first quarter, full moon, or last quarter of the moon. And here is more of that same article.
In the article Shavuot Calendar, Ancient Shavuot Observance, the author expounds on the fact that the Sabbath observed by Yeshua and his family was on neither a Saturday nor a Sunday, and is calculated in a manner altogether different than the modern customs of weekday observance. The method of calculating weekdays on Yeshua's calendar is at variance with the modern fixed week system. According to the system, each week begins on either the new first quarter full moon or last quarter of the moon. Continuing, we read, after the fourth lunar week of the month ends on the 28th, the next day or two is a dark moon day, which is not part of any lunar week. A new week does not begin until the following new moon occurrence. This may seem odd to one used to using the modern fixed week, but to the ancients it made perfect sense to pause and prepare themselves before entering and beginning a new month and a new cycle of weeks. And a new moon day begins the new month. Early Christians were practicing a lunar-based calendar. James Dwyer, in his article, Advanced Astronomy and Bible Texts, writes that the early Christian descriptions of a weekly cycle containing periodic single days are very clear, and this information, coupled with evidence provided by the measurable lunar solar phenomena, strongly indicates that early Christians were practicing a lunar-based calendar, on page 42 in his book. The modern continuous cycling 7-day week did not exist. The same author, in another article entitled A New Look at the Christian Sabbath, expresses the fact that it now seems almost certain that some additional definitions of the early Sabbath cycle are missing from the modern tradition of the 7-day week. Essentially, the modern week as a continuous cycle of 7 days does not seem to equate to the definition of the week as it was used during the early Christian era. The Sabbath was defined by the phases of the moon. Writing about this article, Dwyer asserts that this new research looks at the Sabbath calendar as it would have been known to a mainstream Jew living in the Second Temple era, and it finds the Sabbath to have been a rather sophisticated interface with the lunar solar system. In this earlier time, the Sabbath cycle, surprisingly, was defined by the phases of the moon, and even more surprising than this, the Sabbath cycle also revolved into precise alignment with the annual circuit. Jews were still keeping the Sabbath day according to the lunar week. Later on in the 2nd century AD, proof that the Jews were still keeping the Sabbath day according to the lunar week can be found in the writings of Clement of Alexandria, circa 150 to 215 AD, in the Stromata or Miscellanies, chapter 5. His writings clearly indicate that at this time, the weekly Sabbath was still dictated by the moon's course. Further, in chapter 16 of the Stromata, Clement plainly writes that in periods of 7 days, the moon undergoes its changes. In the first week, she becomes half moon, in the second week, full moon, and in the third week, in her wane, again half moon, and in the fourth week, she disappears. That's in the Stromata or Miscellanies, written by Clement of Alexandria.
Okay, so the weekly Sabbath was tied to the moon, and this is about as plain as it can get. Obviously, in Clement's day, the week, as kept by the Jews, and Yeshua too, was still tied to the moon's phases, and by extension, the weekly Sabbath was also still tied to the moon. It appears, however, that by this time, 150 to 215 AD, some of the Christians had gotten away from a week and Sabbath that was dependent upon the lunar reckoning. So the weekly Sabbath is still tied with the moon. And here are some scriptures for us today. And Yah said in Genesis 1:14, and Yah said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. Days and years are a calendar. Psalms 104:19. He appointed the moon for seasons, and the sun knoweth its going down. Psalms 19, 1-4. The heavens proclaim the glory of Yah. The skies display his craftsmanship. Day after day they continue to speak. Night after night they make him known. They speak without a sound, without a word. Their voice is never heard. Yet their message has gone throughout the earth, and their words to all the world. And Psalms 89:37 says, it will be established forever like the moon, the faithful witness in the sky. So to access more information about all the historical records that show the lunar calendar, it was always the calendar from the beginning of creation. It was the calendar at the time of Yeshua, and that Rome changed the calendar. To access more information about this calendar in the heavens, please go to our website, LunarSabbathDay.com. So thank you for being here today, and I'm going to close the recording.